I thought this was just another rich family story. Until this happened. A woman in a golden yellow dress pushed open a bedroom door, expecting to see her fiancé resting peacefully. What she saw instead made her freeze in the doorway, her hand still on the handle, her breath caught somewhere between her chest and her throat. The maid was leaning over him. Her lips were pressed to his forehead. And for 10 long seconds, nobody in that room said a single word. What happened next inside that mansion would change 3 lives forever. And by the end of this story you will understand why the woman who walked in angry was the one who ended up on her knees, begging for forgiveness. Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Before we start, tell me in the comments, which country are you watching from today? I love seeing where all of you are joining from around the world. Today's story is one of the most emotional ones we've ever told. A story about love, betrayal, and the kind of truth that hides in plain sight until it can't hide anymore. Stay with me until the very end because I promise you, this one is going to stay with you long after it's over. Nobody in that grand New York townhouse expected the ambulance sirens that Tuesday evening. Ethan Caldwell was 34 years old, and by every outward measure, he had everything a man could want. He was the founder and CEO of Caldwell Horizon Group, a real estate and technology empire that stretched across 4 states. His face had been on the cover of business magazines. His name was whispered in boardrooms with a mixture of respect and envy. He drove cars that cost more than most people's houses, and he was engaged to Vanessa Sinclair, a woman as beautiful and polished as anyone in Manhattan's elite circles. But that Tuesday evening, none of it mattered. Because Ethan Caldwell was lying on the marble floor of his own kitchen, his hand clutched to his chest, his breathing shallow and ragged. The only person in the house at that moment was Claire Whitmore. Claire was 34 years old too, the same age as Ethan, though their lives could not have looked more different. She had worked in the Caldwell household for nearly 6 years, first as a part-time housekeeper, then, after Ethan's mother passed away, as the full-time maid who kept the enormous house running. She was a single mother to a 9-year-old boy named Sam, and every single day, she left her small apartment in Queens before sunrise to catch 2 trains and a bus just to make it to the Caldwell estate by 7 in the morning. She never complained. She never asked for more than what she was given. She simply worked, quietly and faithfully, dusting shelves that held more money in decoration than she made in a year, folding shirts that cost more than her monthly rent, and somehow never once letting bitterness touch her heart. That evening, she had been in the hallway carrying a stack of folded towels when she heard it, a heavy thud from the kitchen, followed by silence. She dropped the towels immediately and ran. She found Ethan on the floor, his face pale, sweat beading on his forehead, his lips slightly blue. Claire's training as a mother kicked in instantly. She had once taken a CPR course at Sam's school when they needed volunteers, never imagining she would ever need it for something like this. "Mr. Caldwell, Ethan, can you hear me?" she said, kneeling beside him, her hands already checking his pulse the way she had been taught. His eyes fluttered open weakly. "Chest hurts," he managed to whisper. Claire didn't waste a second. She grabbed the kitchen phone and dialed 911. Her voice steady even as her hands trembled. She gave the address, described his symptoms, and stayed on the line exactly as the operator instructed, all while keeping one hand on Ethan's shoulder, murmuring gently to him, "You're going to be okay. Just breathe with me. In and out. You are not alone right now, Ethan. I'm right here." It took 11 minutes for the ambulance to arrive. 11 minutes that felt like 11 hours. Claire held his hand the entire time, and somewhere in that terrifying stretch of silence and fear, something shifted between them. Not romance, not anything improper, but a bond that only forms between 2 human beings when one saves the other's life. At the hospital, doctors confirmed it was a severe cardiac episode brought on by exhaustion, dehydration, and untreated stress. The kind of thing that happens to powerful men who forget they are human beings first and CEOs second. They said if he had been alone even 20 more minutes, The outcome could have been very different. Vanessa Sinclair, his fiancée, was 3 hours away at a spa retreat in the Hamptons when she got the call. She didn't answer it the first time. She was in the middle of a facial. Claire, meanwhile, sat in the hospital waiting room until nearly midnight, refusing to leave until she knew Ethan was stable, even though her son Sam was home alone with a neighbor checking in on him. When the doctor finally told her Ethan was going to be fine, Claire allowed herself to cry for the first time that whole night. Not tears of romance, but tears of pure relief, the kind you feel when something terrible almost happened to someone you care about. She had no idea that this single night of quiet heroism was about to be twisted into something else entirely. She had no idea that in just a few days, a moment of pure tenderness would be misunderstood by the one person whose opinion mattered most in that house. And she certainly had no idea that the truth about to unravel would expose secrets far darker than anyone could have imagined. Because sometimes the person who saves your life is the one the world is quickest to accuse. 3 days had passed, and Ethan was finally allowed to come home to recover. The doctors were firm: complete bed rest for at least 2 weeks, no stress, no phone calls about business, no visitors except immediate family and caretakers. Vanessa had returned from the Hamptons the day after the incident, full of dramatic apologies and expensive flowers, but within 24 hours, she was already complaining about how boring it was to sit in a quiet house. "I have the Ashford Gala on Friday," she told Ethan on the second night, barely looking up from her phone as she sat at the edge of his bed. "You understand I have to go, right? I already have the dress." Ethan, still weak, still pale, simply nodded. He had learned a long time ago not to argue with Vanessa about social obligations. It was easier to let her have her world while he focused on rebuilding his health. It was Claire who truly nursed him back to strength. Every morning, she prepared warm oatmeal with cinnamon, the way her own grandmother used to make it, because the hospital nutritionist said his heart needed gentle, wholesome foods. She sat with him for 20 minutes at a time, not because it was in her job description, but because loneliness is its own kind of illness, and she could see it clearly written across his face every time Vanessa left the room to answer a call. "You don't have to sit with me," Ethan told her one afternoon, his voice still weak. "I know you have 100 other things to do." Claire smiled gently as she adjusted his pillow. "Sam used to get ear infections a lot when he was little. I learned that medicine helps the body, but somebody sitting beside you helps the heart. You just had a scare with your heart, Mr. Caldwell. I think it needs both kinds of medicine right now." Ethan looked at her for a long moment, something unspoken passing between them. In 6 years of living under the same roof, they had exchanged countless polite greetings, but never had a real conversation like this. He had always seen her as part of the background of his life, reliable, invisible, efficient. He was only now beginning to see her as a person. "Tell me about your son," he said quietly. And so Claire did. She told him about Sam's obsession with dinosaurs, about how he wanted to be a paleontologist, about the little cardboard museum he built in their apartment out of shoeboxes and hand-drawn signs. Ethan found himself laughing for the first time in days. A real laugh, not the practiced boardroom kind. Over the following days, this became a quiet ritual. Claire would bring his meals, check his temperature, help him with small tasks the doctor recommended for gentle recovery, and in between they talked about Sam. About Ethan's own childhood, which, surprisingly, hadn't been as golden as people assumed. His father had been distant, obsessed with growing the family business, and Ethan had spent much of his boyhood feeling invisible in a house full of staff, much like Claire's own son sometimes felt invisible in a world of busy adults. Vanessa noticed none of this. She was consumed with gala preparations, brunches with friends, and Instagram posts about supporting my fiancé through this difficult time. Photographed, of course, from outside the hospital before Ethan was even discharged. One evening, exactly 6 days after the cardiac scare, Ethan had a mild dizzy spell after standing up too quickly. Claire rushed to steady him, guiding him gently back onto the bed. her heart pounding with fear that something worse was happening again. When he was safely settled, breathing normally, relief flooded through her so intensely that she didn't even think before she did it. She leaned down and pressed a soft, brief kiss to his forehead, the same instinctive gesture a mother gives a frightened child, the same gesture of pure relief that has nothing to do with romance and everything to do with gratitude that someone you almost lost is still here. It lasted less than 2 seconds. But 2 seconds was exactly enough time for the bedroom door to creak open behind her. Vanessa Sinclair stood frozen in the doorway, dressed in a stunning yellow gown for a charity event she had rushed home to change for. Her hand still on the door handle, her eyes wide with a fury that had been building for far longer than this single moment. And in that instant, everything Claire and Ethan had quietly built over the past week was about to collide with an explosion neither of them saw coming. "Get away from him." Vanessa's voice cut through the room like broken glass. She didn't shout. She didn't need to. The venom in her tone was enough to make Claire step back instantly. Her hands raised, her heart hammering. "Vanessa, this isn't what it looks like. Don't." Vanessa's finger shot up, pointed directly at Claire's chest. "Don't you dare stand in my fiancé's bedroom and lie to my face." Ethan tried to sit up. "Vanessa, please let me explain, she was just—" "I saw it, Ethan." Vanessa's voice cracked, somewhere between rage and humiliation. "I saw her kissing you. In your bed. While you're recovering, while I'm out there planning our entire future, our wedding, our life. And this is what's happening in my house." "It's not your house," Claire said quietly, immediately regretting the words the moment they left her mouth. Vanessa's eyes turned to slits. "Excuse me." "I'm sorry," Claire said quickly, lowering her eyes. "I didn't mean it that way. I only meant—" "Ma'am, I promise you it was nothing." He had a dizzy spell. "I was scared. I reacted without thinking. It was a moment of relief, nothing more." But Vanessa wasn't listening anymore. Something had cracked open inside her. Not just jealousy, but a deep, festering insecurity she had been carrying for months, an insecurity she would never admit out loud. The fear that Ethan had never truly loved her the way he loved the idea of having someone beautiful on his arm. And now, faced with the image of another woman's lips on his forehead, a woman with none of Vanessa's wealth, none of her social status, nothing but calloused hands and a modest uniform, that insecurity exploded into something ugly. "You're fired," Vanessa said coldly. "Pack your things and get out of this house tonight." "Vanessa, you can't do that," Ethan said, struggling to sit up fully now, his voice strained. "This is my house. My staff. My decision." "Then choose, Ethan." Vanessa crossed her arms, her chin lifted, her eyes glassy with tears she refused to let fall. "Choose right now. Either she leaves this house tonight or I do. Because I refuse, to live under the same roof as a woman who kisses my fiancé the second my back is turned." The room fell into a suffocating silence. Claire stood there, humiliation burning through her chest, but beneath the humiliation was something worse, fear. She lost this job, she lost everything. Rent. Sam's school fees. The small stability she had built brick by brick over 6 exhausting years. She thought of her son waiting for her at home, unaware that his mother's entire world might collapse over a 2-second act of instinctive human kindness. "Please," Claire whispered, her voice breaking for the first time. "I have a son. I need this job. I swear to you, on my son's life, nothing improper has ever happened between us. Please." But Vanessa's face remained a wall of ice. "I don't care about your son's life. I care about my future." It was at that exact moment that Ethan, pale, weak, still recovering from a heart that had nearly stopped beating just days earlier, pushed himself up and said the words that would change everything. "If she goes," he said quietly, but with a steadiness that silenced the room, "then this engagement is over." Vanessa's mouth fell open. "What did you just say to me?" "You heard me." Ethan's eyes, though tired, were clear and certain. This woman saved my life, Vanessa. While you were at a spa. While you were choosing a dress for a gala. She sat on the kitchen floor with me, held my hand, called the ambulance, and did not leave this house until she knew I was going to survive. And tonight, when I got dizzy and scared, she comforted me the way any decent human being would comfort someone they cared about. That is not a scandal, Vanessa. That is basic human compassion. Something I am beginning to realize you have never once shown me. Vanessa's face went white, then red, a storm of emotions crossing her features. So this is it. You're choosing the maid over me. I'm choosing the truth, Ethan said. And the truth is, I don't think you've ever once asked how I was really feeling since I came home from that hospital. Not once. Claire stood frozen between them, tears silently sliding down her cheeks, caught in the middle of a storm she never asked to be part of. A storm that was about to reveal secrets far bigger than anyone in that room could have imagined. What happened next unraveled faster than anyone expected. Vanessa, humiliated and cornered, did something she would later regret for the rest of her life. In a fit of blind fury, she reached for her phone and pulled up something she had been saving for weeks. Something she thought she would never need to use, something that was about to expose her own hidden truth instead of Claire's. "You want to talk about compassion, Ethan," she said, her voice shaking with rage. "You want to talk about who's really been loyal to you." She turned her phone around, showing him a series of messages on the screen. Messages between herself and a man named Grant Ashford, the very host of the charity gala she had rushed off to attend earlier that week. Messages filled with pet names, private jokes, plans to meet, and one, dated just 2 days after Ethan's hospitalization, that read, "Can't wait until this whole engagement thing is finally behind us. You deserve so much better than playing nurse to a sick old man." The room went completely silent. Ethan stared at the phone, his face unreadable, a mixture of heartbreak and something almost like relief. The strange, painful relief of finally understanding a truth his heart had suspected for a long time but had been too afraid to face. "I wasn't going to show you like this," Vanessa said, suddenly quieter, realizing what she had just revealed in her anger. "Grant and it's not what it looks like." "Don't," Ethan said, holding up a hand, echoing the very word she had used against Claire minutes earlier. "Don't you dare stand in my bedroom and lie to my face." The irony of his own words hung heavily in the air. Claire, still standing near the doorway, felt her heart breaking not for herself anymore, but for Ethan, a man who had nearly died alone in his kitchen while the woman who claimed to love him was planning a life with someone else. "How long?" Ethan asked quietly. Vanessa's silence was answer enough. "For months," she finally admitted, her voice barely a whisper now, all the fire drained out of her. "It started 4 months ago. I was going to end it. I swear I was going to end it before the wedding." Ethan let out a slow, exhausted breath, one hand pressed against his chest, not from physical pain this time, but from something deeper. The pain of realizing that the life he had built, the future he thought was secure, had been built on sand for months while he was too busy running a company to notice the cracks forming right beneath him. "You accused an innocent woman of betrayal," he said slowly, "while you yourself were the one living a lie." Vanessa opened her mouth to respond, but no words came. What could she possibly say? Claire, despite everything, despite being humiliated, despite being called names, despite nearly losing her job over a moment of pure kindness, felt no satisfaction in this moment. She had spent her whole life believing that hardship builds character, that struggle teaches you not to take joy in someone else's downfall, even someone who had wronged you. She simply stood quietly, watching two people's carefully constructed world collapse in front of her, feeling only sadness for the wreckage. "I think," Ethan said finally, looking at Vanessa with tired, clear eyes, "you should leave. Tonight. Take your things. I'll have my lawyer contact you about the ring and the wedding deposits." Vanessa's composure finally shattered completely. Tears spilled down her face, smudging her carefully applied makeup. Her golden gown suddenly looking less like glamour and more like a costume for a role she could no longer play. "Ethan, please," she whispered. "I made a mistake. People make mistakes." "Yes," he said quietly. "And you almost destroyed an innocent woman's life to cover up your own." It was in that exact moment, watching Vanessa's proud posture finally crumble, that the real weight of what had happened settled over the room. The woman who had walked in 10 seconds earlier with fire in her eyes, ready to destroy someone else's reputation, was now the one standing broken, exposed, and utterly alone, about to do something she never imagined she would do that night. Beg for forgiveness she did not deserve, from a woman she had wronged without cause. Vanessa turned slowly toward Claire, her golden gown suddenly feeling heavy on her shoulders, her carefully built world of status and comfort crumbling around her with every passing second. "I'm sorry," Vanessa said, her voice trembling, barely audible. "I shouldn't have said those things to you. I shouldn't have threatened your job. I was wrong." Claire looked at her for a long moment. There was a version of this story where Claire could have let her humiliation turn to satisfaction, could have enjoyed watching the woman who had just called her worthless fall apart in front of her. But that wasn't who Claire was, and it never had been. "I forgive you," Claire said softly. "Not because what you did was right, but because I know what fear does to people. And I think tonight, you were more afraid than angry." Vanessa's lips trembled, and for the first time since Claire had known her, genuine tears, not performative ones for cameras or sympathy, slipped down her cheeks. "I don't deserve that," Vanessa whispered. "Maybe not," Claire said honestly. "But grace was never really about what someone deserves." Ethan watched this exchange in silence, something in his chest tightening with a mixture of admiration and quiet grief. He had spent 6 years walking past this woman in his own hallways without truly seeing her, and in one single evening, she had shown him more genuine character than his fiancé had in 3 years of engagement. Vanessa gathered a small bag of belongings that night and left the townhouse before midnight, her driver waiting outside in silence, the golden dress she had worn to feel powerful now just a reminder of the night her carefully built world came crashing down around her own choices. The days that followed were quiet, almost strangely peaceful, the way a house feels after a storm has finally passed. Ethan continued his recovery, and Claire continued her work, though something between them had undeniably shifted. There was no dramatic confession of love, no fairy tale romance rushed into being out of guilt or gratitude. Instead, there was something steadier, a friendship built on honesty, forged in the fire of a night neither of them would ever forget. Word of the broken engagement spread quickly through Manhattan's social circles, as these things always do. Reporters speculated. Socialites gossiped. Vanessa's reputation, once polished and admired, cracked under the weight of whispered rumors about her affair with Grant Ashford, whose own family quietly distanced themselves from the scandal to protect their business reputation. Meanwhile, Claire simply continued showing up every morning, tired but steady, carrying the same quiet dignity that had carried her through 6 years of invisible service and one unforgettable night of near tragedy. One afternoon, about 3 weeks after the incident, Ethan called Claire into his study. Not the kitchen, not the hallway, but his actual study, a room she had cleaned 1,000 times but had never once been formally invited into. "Sit down, Claire," he said gently, gesturing to the leather chair across from his desk. She hesitated. "Mr. Caldwell, I have laundry to finish, and Sam has a school project." "Please," he said. "Just 5 minutes." She sat, her hands folded nervously in her lap, unsure what this meeting could be about. "I've been thinking a lot these past few weeks," Ethan began, "about what almost happened to me. About how close I came to dying alone on my kitchen floor. And about who was actually there for me when it mattered most." Claire's eyes softened. "Mr. Caldwell, you don't have to." "Let me finish," he said, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "I want to do something for you and for Sam. Not out of pity. Not out of guilt over what happened with Vanessa. But because you deserve it and because I finally understand what real loyalty looks like." Claire's heart began to pound, unsure of what was coming next, unaware that this conversation was about to change the entire trajectory of her life and her son's future. "I want to pay for Sam's education," Ethan said simply. "All of it. From now until the day he graduates college, wherever he chooses to go, whatever he chooses to study. Dinosaurs included." Claire's breath caught in her throat. "Mr. Caldwell, I can't accept that. That's too much. I only did what any decent person would do." "No," Ethan said firmly, leaning forward. "Most people wouldn't have done what you did. Most people would have called the ambulance and waited outside, uncertain, afraid to get involved. You held my hand. You stayed until midnight. You risked your own son being alone at home because you refused to leave until you knew I was safe. That is not something any decent person does. That is something a truly good person does." Tears welled in Claire's eyes, but she shook her head. "I appreciate it more than you know, truly. But I've worked hard my whole life to build things on my own. I don't want Sam to grow up thinking things are handed to him." Ethan studied her for a long moment, respect deepening in his gaze. "Then let's call it a scholarship," he said. "The Caldwell Family Scholarship, established in honor of the people who show up when it matters most, starting with Sam Whitmore as its very first recipient. Not charity, Claire. An investment in someone who has already proven, at 9 years old, through his mother's example, exactly what character looks like." Claire finally allowed herself a small, genuine laugh through her tears. "You're stubborn. I've been told that a lot lately," Ethan said with a soft smile. Over the following months, Ethan slowly returned to full health, both physically and emotionally. He restructured parts of his company to reduce the crushing stress that had contributed to his heart episode in the first place, delegating more responsibility, finally taking weekends off for the first time in nearly a decade. He began spending more time at home and inevitably more time around Claire and eventually around Sam, who was thrilled beyond words to discover that Mr. Ethan, as he called him, actually knew quite a lot about the Triassic period. Their relationship grew slowly, the way real, lasting things always do, not through dramatic declarations, but through shared dinners, quiet conversations, homework help sessions at the kitchen table, and the simple, steady comfort of two people who had weathered something painful together and come out the other side with clearer eyes. Vanessa, meanwhile, found herself increasingly isolated. Her relationship with Grant Ashford, once secretive and thrilling, crumbled within weeks once the affair became public knowledge, as these things often do once the excitement of secrecy disappears. The social circle that once welcomed her at every gala grew colder, whispering behind perfectly manicured hands about the woman who had cheated on one of Manhattan's most eligible bachelors, only to lose him entirely in the process. Nearly a year after that fateful night, Vanessa reached out to Claire directly, requesting a brief meeting at a quiet cafe far from the social circles that once defined her world. Claire, true to her nature, agreed. "I've thought about that night more times than I can count," Vanessa admitted, stirring her coffee slowly, her once polished confidence now replaced with something more humble, more human. "I was so afraid of losing my position, my status, my picture-perfect life, that I turned my fear into cruelty toward someone who had done nothing but show kindness. I judged you based on where you stood in a room, not on who you actually were." Claire listened patiently, the way she always did. "I'm not asking you to forgive me again," Vanessa continued. "You already gave me more grace than I deserved that night. I just needed you to know that I understand now. Real worth was never about the dress someone wears or the house someone owns. It's about what they do when no one is watching, when there's nothing to gain." Claire reached across the small table and gently placed her hand over Vanessa's. "Everyone deserves the chance to become someone better than the worst moment of their life. I hope you find peace, Vanessa. I truly do." 2 years passed. The mansion that once felt cold and formal under Vanessa's carefully curated decor now felt warm and lived in, filled with the sound of Sam's laughter echoing down hallways that used to know only silence and the click of polished shoes. Ethan had long since stopped thinking of Claire as the maid, and Claire had long since stopped thinking of herself as someone who didn't belong in rooms with chandeliers and marble floors. Their relationship had grown naturally, without pressure, without rush, built on the kind of foundation that survives far longer than passion built on appearances alone. Ethan proposed to Claire on a quiet Tuesday evening, not at some extravagant gala or with a 5-carat diamond flashed in front of cameras, but in the same kitchen where she had once knelt beside him on the cold marble floor, saving his life. "This is where it started," he told her, kneeling down not out of tradition, but because it felt right, holding a small velvet box in his trembling hands. "This is where I first understood what real love looks like. Not the kind that shows up for photographs, but the kind that shows up when things are hardest." Claire, tears streaming freely down her face, said yes before he even finished the question. Sam, now 11 years old, was the first to know, and his reaction was somehow both the most important and most amusing part of the entire evening. "Does this mean Mr. Ethan is actually going to be my dad now?" he asked, his eyes wide with hope. "Because if so, I want a real dinosaur exhibit in the backyard. Like a real one." "Let me finish," he said, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "I want to do something for you and for Sam. Not out of pity. Not out of guilt over what happened with Vanessa. But because you deserve it and because I finally understand what real loyalty looks like." Claire's heart began to pound, unsure of what was coming next, unaware that this conversation was about to change the entire trajectory of her life and her son's future. "I want to pay for Sam's education," Ethan said simply. "All of it. From now until the day he graduates college, wherever he chooses to go, whatever he chooses to study. Dinosaurs included." Claire's breath caught in her throat. "Mr. Caldwell, I can't accept that. That's too much. I only did what any decent person would do." "No," Ethan said firmly, leaning forward. "Most people wouldn't have done what you did. Most people would have called the ambulance and waited outside, uncertain, afraid to get involved. You held my hand. You stayed until midnight. You risked your own son being alone at home because you refused to leave until you knew I was safe. That is not something any decent person does. That is something a truly good person does." Tears welled in Claire's eyes, but she shook her head. "I appreciate it more than you know, truly. But I've worked hard my whole life to build things on my own. I don't want Sam to grow up thinking things are handed to him." Ethan studied her for a long moment, respect deepening in his gaze. "Then let's call it a scholarship," he said. "The Caldwell Family Scholarship, established in honor of the people who show up when it matters most, starting with Sam Whitmore as its very first recipient. Not charity, Claire. An investment in someone who has already proven, at 9 years old, through his mother's example, exactly what character looks like." Claire finally allowed herself a small, genuine laugh through her tears. "You're stubborn. I've been told that a lot lately," Ethan said with a soft smile. Over the following months, Ethan slowly returned to full health, both physically and emotionally. He restructured parts of his company to reduce the crushing stress that had contributed to his heart episode in the first place, delegating more responsibility, finally taking weekends off for the first time in nearly a decade. He began spending more time at home and inevitably more time around Claire and eventually around Sam, who was thrilled beyond words to discover that Mr. Ethan, as he called him, actually knew quite a lot about the Triassic period. Their relationship grew slowly, the way real, lasting things always do, not through dramatic declarations, but through shared dinners, quiet conversations, homework help sessions at the kitchen table, and the simple, steady comfort of two people who had weathered something painful together and come out the other side with clearer eyes. Vanessa, meanwhile, found herself increasingly isolated. Her relationship with Grant Ashford, once secretive and thrilling, crumbled within weeks once the affair became public knowledge, as these things often do once the excitement of secrecy disappears. The social circle that once welcomed her at every gala grew colder, whispering behind perfectly manicured hands about the woman who had cheated on one of Manhattan's most eligible bachelors, only to lose him entirely in the process. Nearly a year after that fateful night, Vanessa reached out to Claire directly, requesting a brief meeting at a quiet cafe far from the social circles that once defined her world. Claire, true to her nature, agreed. "I've thought about that night more times than I can count," Vanessa admitted, stirring her coffee slowly, her once polished confidence now replaced with something more humble, more human. "I was so afraid of losing my position, my status, my picture-perfect life, that I turned my fear into cruelty toward someone who had done nothing but show kindness. I judged you based on where you stood in a room, not on who you actually were." Claire listened patiently, the way she always did. "I'm not asking you to forgive me again," Vanessa continued. "You already gave me more grace than I deserved that night. I just needed you to know that I understand now. Real worth was never about the dress someone wears or the house someone owns. It's about what they do when no one is watching, when there's nothing to gain." Claire reached across the small table and gently placed her hand over Vanessa's. "Everyone deserves the chance to become someone better than the worst moment of their life. I hope you find peace, Vanessa. I truly do." 2 years passed. The mansion that once felt cold and formal under Vanessa's carefully curated decor now felt warm and lived in, filled with the sound of Sam's laughter echoing down hallways that used to know only silence and the click of polished shoes. Ethan had long since stopped thinking of Claire as the maid, and Claire had long since stopped thinking of herself as someone who didn't belong in rooms with chandeliers and marble floors. Their relationship had grown naturally, without pressure, without rush, built on the kind of foundation that survives far longer than passion built on appearances alone. Ethan proposed to Claire on a quiet Tuesday evening, not at some extravagant gala or with a 5-carat diamond flashed in front of cameras, but in the same kitchen where she had once knelt beside him on the cold marble floor, saving his life. "This is where it started," he told her, kneeling down not out of tradition, but because it felt right, holding a small velvet box in his trembling hands. "This is where I first understood what real love looks like. Not the kind that shows up for photographs, but the kind that shows up when things are hardest." Claire, tears streaming freely down her face, said yes before he even finished the question. Sam, now 11 years old, was the first to know, and his reaction was somehow both the most important and most amusing part of the entire evening. "Does this mean Mr. Ethan is actually going to be my dad now?" he asked, his eyes wide with hope. "Because if so, I want a real dinosaur exhibit in the backyard. Like a real one." Claire was quiet for a moment before answering. "I think about it sometimes. But I try not to dwell on what-ifs. I believe some moments are simply meant to happen exactly the way they do. I was where I needed to be. That's enough for me." Ethan reached over and took her hand, the same hand that had once held his on a cold kitchen floor while he fought for his life. "It's more than enough," he said softly. "It's everything." As Sam grew older, he began to understand the full weight of the story his family had lived through, not just the fairy tale version of a maid who married a billionaire, but the deeper truth beneath it, that his mother's quiet integrity, her refusal to abandon someone in need even at great personal risk, was what had truly changed all of their lives. When he was 16, Sam was asked to write an essay for a school scholarship application about a person who inspired him most. Without hesitation, he wrote about his mother, not about the wealth that eventually came into their lives, not about the mansion or the private school or the opportunities that once seemed impossible, but about a woman who knelt on a cold kitchen floor for a man she barely knew personally, simply because it was the right thing to do. "My mother taught me," Sam wrote, "that character isn't about what you do when people are watching and rewarding you for it. It's about what you do in the quiet moments, when no one will ever know, when there's nothing to gain except knowing you did the right thing." She never expected anything from that night. She never once thought about what she might receive in return. She simply acted because someone needed help, and she was capable of giving it. The essay won him the scholarship, and more importantly, it moved his mother to tears when she read it for the first time, a private moment shared quietly between mother and son at their kitchen table. A different kitchen table now, but the same values that had always guided their small, resilient family. Ethan, reading the essay over Claire's shoulder, felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude wash over him, not just for the family he had built, but for the life-altering lesson that near-death experience had taught him all those years ago. That wealth and status are fragile, fleeting things, easily built and just as easily lost, but genuine character, genuine loyalty, genuine love, these are the things that remain steady through every storm life throws at you. He often thought back to that terrible, beautiful night when Vanessa had stormed into the bedroom, ready to destroy an innocent woman's reputation over a 2-second gesture of pure human kindness, and how that single explosive moment had ultimately revealed far more about Vanessa's own hidden truths than it ever revealed about Claire's character. Sometimes, he realized, the loudest accusations come from people desperately trying to hide their own quiet guilt. And sometimes the quietest people in the room, the ones who fold towels in silence, who show up early and leave late, who never ask for recognition, turn out to have the loudest, most beautiful hearts of all. Years later, when people asked Ethan Caldwell what the most important lesson of his life had been, he never talked about business strategy, market growth, or financial success. He always told the same story. The story of a Tuesday evening when his heart nearly stopped beating, and the person who saved him wasn't someone with power or status, but someone with an unshakable, quiet goodness that no amount of money could ever buy. "I used to think success meant surrounding yourself with impressive people," he would say. "Now I understand that success means surrounding yourself with good people. There's a difference, and it took nearly dying to teach me what that difference really is." Claire, for her part, never saw herself as extraordinary. To her, she had simply done what any mother, any human being with a conscience, would do in that moment. She showed up for someone who needed help, and later, she extended grace to someone who had wronged her, because she understood deeply that everyone carries fears and insecurities that sometimes make them act in ways they later regret. Their story became, in its own quiet way, a reminder to everyone who heard it, that true worth is never measured by the size of your house, the label on your dress, or the number of zeros in your bank account. True worth is measured in the moments when no one is watching, in the choice to be kind when kindness costs you something, and in the courage to forgive even when forgiveness feels impossible. Vanessa's cruelty that night, born from her own hidden guilt, was ultimately exposed for exactly what it was: a desperate attempt to protect a lie by attacking the truth. And Claire's quiet dignity, her refusal to fight fire with fire even when she had every right to, became the very thing that changed the course of her entire family's future. Sam grew up to become exactly what he always dreamed of becoming, a respected paleontologist, and every single year, on the anniversary of that terrifying, transformative night in the Caldwell kitchen, the family gathers together, Ethan, Claire, Sam, and eventually Sam's own children, to remember not the scandal, not the drama, not the golden dress or the shattered engagement, but the deeper truth beneath it all. That love, real love, shows up quietly, faithfully, and without conditions, especially when it matters most. And that is the story of the maid who was falsely accused, the fiancée who learned the hardest lesson of her life, and the billionaire who finally understood that the most valuable thing in his entire empire was never something money could buy. If this story touched your heart today, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel for more stories just like this one, and share it with someone in your life who needs a reminder that kindness always matters even when no one is watching. Thank you so much for staying with me until the very end. I'll see you in the next story.